and that was with Maria Jordan, actually, from Microsoft. And that covered Azure Arc, but it also covered hybrid computing in general and some of the statistics around that and use cases. Today is going to be more focused on the technology. There are a couple of slides that are similar around the capabilities, but then, as I've mentioned, after those two slides, this is around the demo. So if you're new and you didn't attend the one in October, great. Hopefully you'll get a lot of value from this. But also if you did attend the one in October, you should still get some value from this as well. Ignite was very recently, and there's been some news that have come out of Ignite as well. So in terms of the technical side, there are actually some new additions that have come out since we did that webinar in October. So quickly, around an overview of Azure Arc, and actually this is growing almost weekly. What it allows you to do is deliver a consistent multi-cloud and on-premises management platform. So essentially, you can project your non-Azure resources, whether they are on-prem, AWS, or any other Google for that matter, or any other cloud platform such as Google. You can project them into Azure to allow you to manage them and have governance and monitoring through a single pane of glass. So whether you have a hybrid model, which is super common, we still see this all the time with the customers we're working with, or you have a multi-cloud model. This works for both of them. It supports both Windows and Linux OS. There's a large list of that, which previously I've gone into, and I'm not going to use this call for that because it just continues to grow, but feel free to have a look at our Microsoft website in terms of the supported operating systems. Today, and the purpose of today, we're going to focus more on infrastructure, virtual machines, servers, SQL workloads, and how you can manage and patch them. But actually, Azure Arc does a lot more than that, and that's been growing, as I mentioned, over the last few weeks. So you can manage Kubernetes clusters, databases, VMware at a VMware vSphere level. So the ability to create virtual machines that are actually running on-prem via templates or networks and things like that. So the type of management actions you would usually do on-prem through VMware, you can actually do through this single pane of glass. Also SC VMM as well is also included, but I'm going to show you an overview of those in the demo, but that's not what the focus is going to be about today. It's also worth noting that, again, there's been some changes to this at Ignite, but it allows you to deploy Azure cloud services, SQL, for example, or app services, functions, and more on-prem. So it's almost that I speak about projecting your on-prem or cloud resources into Azure, but it's actually more of a bridge, and you can do it both ways. But again, the focus today are on that manageability of your on-prem resources mostly, but I will touch on a couple of the other areas. I'm going to show you all of this today in the demo, so I'm not going to spend very long on this slide or the next one at all, but there's a way to kind of show you some of the capabilities. First of all, there's that centralized management, that single pane of glass, which you'll probably hear me say 10 or 15 times throughout this webinar, but the ability to manage and view your inventory from that single pane of glass, which in this instance is the Azure portal. Monitoring, definitely probably the most used or the most requested functionality of Azure Arc. So the ability to monitor OS performance, processes, dependencies, things like that of your on-prem resources, and have that in the Azure portal. The ability to alert from that monitoring as well, whichever way you usually alert, whether you have an ITSM tool or via emails or API, the ability to alert from those on-prem resources. There's unified governance. Any of you that may have used Azure before, be aware of something called Azure policies, which I probably mention on every single webinar. The ability to have policies and guardrails and visibility of certain rules set against those workloads. So to create a rule, for example, notify me or make sure all certificates are valid and not expired. That's one example, but also the ability to have basically a configuration view of your workload. So you may have a virtual machine that's a web server, for example, and you can create configurations using DSC or Chef, and make sure that they remain configured exactly how you want them. So to create those guardrails to make sure that those virtual machines are doing exactly what they should be doing, and you have that ability through Azure Arc. It's super easy to deploy. Actually, it's got even easier recently, but you can do this via an agent, scale or per machine. There are some minimal kind of prereqs required, especially around networking. However, there is a service that's now available that makes that a little easier, and that's a little bit like a proxy to take away some of those requirements and the networking requirements. As I've mentioned, it supports most operating systems. Obviously, it needs to be able to speak to Azure, whether that's over the internet or internally via a private endpoint and a VPN connection. But again, that has actually been made a lot easier recently with an additional service. I mentioned this already, but VM configuration, create networks and disks and VMware VMs from the Azure portal. I believe this is still in preview, but this is something that we expect to see used more and more. Although at the moment it's not a functionality we see a lot of, in all honesty. Something I'll show you today around Defender, but the integration or to integrate into Defender via Defender for Cloud, and also, of course, the ability to onboard those on-prem machines into something like Sentinel, which is something that we have done quite a lot of some of our customers via a SOC service, for example, but it makes it a lot easier to onboard them when it's being done through Azure Arc. Excuse me. Managed patching is probably the second most used functionality of this when we're talking about infrastructure. So manage OS updates for Windows and Linux servers. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time today actually going over that and showing you exactly how that works. And finally, something I mentioned on the previous webinar, which I think is underutilized, not actually just Azure Arc, but actually all kind of virtual machines in Azure, which is the ability to use Windows Admin Center direct from a portal, direct from the browser, to really give you that end-to-end management via a single pane of glass. And again, that's something I'm going to show you today on the demo. Final slide. There are also some additional functionality that you can get from Azure Arc if you're running a SQL workload on that machine. So the ability to view your entire SQL estate, the servers, the databases, the type of licensing you're using, that's very much possible. Within that as well is a service called Best Practice Assessment. So a very quick actually report, and I'll show you this, that looks over your SQL estate and gives you like a traffic light system, a RAG status over certain assessments on those workloads. It uses over 450, I believe, probably more now, rules to evaluate that and to run that assessment at scale, and you can also schedule those. Similar to the previous slide, of course, monitoring is always important and is also baked in. But something that is useful, some customers we work with, and you may be the same, you have a hybrid environment for a reason. Right? I'm not going to say that every workload in the world should live in the cloud. It doesn't and it won't. But for some people, in the future, you will look to migrate workloads to Azure. And when you have a SQL workload onboarded into Azure Arc, you have the ability actually to quickly see if you can do that in the future, which service it could migrate to. And also, if there are issues which is stopping that, the ability to view what those issues are and the fixes as well, which is super useful. Something which is fairly new, but automated backups. So you can schedule SQL backups from the Azure portal. It's worth noting that they are stored in the default backup location of that instance, so back on-prem wherever you're doing that. It can't do it to a URL, but they are not stored in Azure. There's different services to do that actually, but they're not stored in Azure at this moment in time. But you can use backup schedules, and you can apply that to both instance or a database level. And again, I'm going to demo that today as well. Managed HA and DR, so the ability to view clusters if you've got them via the portal, but also things like availability groups, replicas, failover modes, things like that as well you can view. And again, we're going to get onto that in the demo. So, as I mentioned, the majority of time will be spent in the demo today. All of the things that I've just covered, I'm going to show you. And after each couple of services also, I will pause to see if there are any questions or anything in the chat. Hopefully the demo gods look down on me today, but as you can see there from the list, that's what I'm looking to show you today within this demo, ending with a discussion around licensing, which is always a nice subject, but also a couple of the new features, which I think is only going to grow in the future. Perfect transition there from PowerPoint to Azure. So in terms of demo, I'll start quickly with an overview. So if you search Azure Arc within the search bar, this is the main overview, the main screen. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to focus on really machines today and SQL Server instances. But if I expand this, you can actually see that this list is growing substantially over the last few months. So whether that's to manage Stark HCI, VMware vCenters, the ability to manage assets and IoT assets, but also create Azure services and have them running on-prem. You can see there the list, which has also been growing. So it's all from one screen in terms of the different Azure Arc services that you can view, but we're going to spend most of our time today inside of the machines and the SQL Server instances. It's worth noting this demo that I'm using today is actually done with something called Artbox, which you can actually see here on the screen. So it's Bicep, it's written in Bicep, and you can deploy that. And what it essentially does, and what I'm using today, is it will create a virtual machine in Azure with Hyper-V on it, which is then running the machines that I'll show you in Arc. So these are not actually on-prem, but the way I'll demo it today is exactly as if they would be. Azure, as far as it's aware, these are running on-prem, right? They're running in Hyper-V. Due to the licensing requirements, however, and I'll get onto that right at the end, there are a couple of services today that I'm going to show you, on a traditional VM, but it would still look the same as it was Azure Arc. The reason being is this is an evaluation copy that I'm running on these machines, but I'll talk about that more when I get to it. I just don't want you to think I'm doing anything dodgy when I jump from one machine to another. So first of all, if I go to machines here, you can see already that I've got 5 Arc VMs projected into Azure. And also we have a mix here of Windows Server 2019, 2022. We have SQL box, and we also have a Linux box there as well. I'm going to spend the majority of time in that 2022 server. So once I've selected it, it's now going nice and fast for me, as you can see. What you will eventually get is quickly just an overview. Anyone that spends a lot of time in Azure will be familiar with a lot of these options on the left-hand side, or what Microsoft call blades. But when it's enrolled via Azure Arc, you can see here the main functionality shown on this overview. You can also get to these via the blades on the left-hand side. It'll show me the computer name, the FQDN, the operating system, for example, manufacturer, and there's some additional pieces which I'll touch on later on today, which it also displays when you go onto that overview. Where I want to start, however, is the monitoring side of things. There's different ways you can get to this. As I go through this session, it's worth noting that like many services in Azure, there are views for a per resource basis. So I can look at monitoring for this single virtual machine, but most of the time there's also a way to view this at scale if you wish to do so, and I'll also show you that. So first of all, in terms of monitoring, be aware that there is a cost for this. Okay, as with monitoring, there it incurs a cost for logs first of all, which is around 50p per gigabyte, but also you get the first 5 gig for free. So this is not a free service, but if you, for example, limit logs and things like that, you can reduce those costs. There are also costs for alerting, depending on how many alerts and what type of alerts it is you're looking to do. So as I go through the demo, I will highlight whenever there are costs or when certain services are free. As you can see here, first of all, it's a really simple machine. We've got some really simple statistics around disk performance. We can look at CPU, memory, for example, and the usage there. And we also have statistics around things such as IOPS and disks and disk latency. This is useful. You can alert from this. This is quite traditional, common type of metrics that you would view, especially for something like a virtual machine or a server. What it also has as well is the ability to view a map. What this map shows you once it's loaded is essentially what are the processors on this box and what is it talking to. Try and zoom in here. You can see some of the different processors, and then I can view what else is that talking to, what port is that speaking over, for example. Sometimes it's really useful in terms of troubleshooting or understanding exactly what's really happening on a box. Additionally, there are workbooks. This is classed as a workbook, a way to visualize information. There are galleries for workbooks. You can create custom workbooks, but another one which is built into the service is something called the connections overview. Kind of similar to the map, really. What this shows you is, again, the different kind of services, processes that are running, the connections that they're making, and also if there's anything malicious detected. As we see here, break this down, have a look at some of the different processes, the responses, if there's been any failed responses, for example, and the amount of data as well that we're seeing go through those connections. So that's built in out of the box. There's nothing you need to do to set this up. Once your machine is onboarded into Arc, you will get this view. Obviously, the next step, or what should usually be the next step here, is great, we've got the information, we've got the metrics, let's get some alerting set up. You can do that. You can create what's called action groups to decide what am I going to do with this alert. As I mentioned earlier on, that could be an email, it could be a connection into an ITSM tool such as ServiceNow, for example, which works natively. But if you're going to set up monitoring, what we see for every customer really is that ability to set up alerting off the back of that. As I mentioned earlier on, that is a per machine view. But what we can also do is have a look at this across all of them. So here I'm kind of viewing via monitor all of the Arc enabled machines, and then I can see similar statistics if I want to, but across them all, I can see if there's certain ones which are using CPU more than others, for example. And by the way, you can pin these so you can create custom dashboards. You may have different teams, different personas, depending on your operating model within your business. But you can create those dashboards to give people the information that they need and not anything that they don't really need to keep the value and efficiency high more than anything. Before I move on and move from monitoring, yeah, I was going to ask, are there any questions around the monitoring side of things?
There was just one about what tab or option was the visual port connections map on?
What's that, sorry?
What tab or option was the visual port connections map on? Maybe you can ask for clarification. That's what.
They missed this here because this is the map.
Simon, feel free to come off mute if you want to, no problem.
No, fine. That was the map I was after. Thank you.
Yeah, it's there. So if it's within, as I say, you can do it from the VM and go to Insights, or you could get the same thing if you're going into Azure Monitor as well. I could have showed you the same thing there around that map. You always have it closed, but it's also worth noting that when you're doing this, you can sometimes get some more information from this little sidebar here, which is worth noting. So go back to the overview on this machine again to show the capability. As I mentioned earlier on, the second most used, and monitoring and updates is by far the two pieces of functionality that are used, that we see anyway, with our customers and we use for our own managed service, is of course updates. What else alone? So this is a similar setup, or is actually the exact same view that you will see if you've got updates set up for Azure native virtual machines. It's the same tool, which is Update Manager. And as you can see here, I'm viewing this on a per service basis. So this is assessed what assessment or what updates are there at the moment, and it's letting you know if it needs reboot required or what the total updates are on this machine. If you want, you can view history. So for example, last night, I know this installed updates because I told it to. And also yesterday, earlier on in the day, there was an assessment, a periodic assessment, which is essentially check for updates. Do I have them? Display them within this GUI. And I'll show you how that works in a second. But this is on a per virtual machine basis. If I want to, right now, I can do a one-time update. I can check for updates straight away without looking to build a schedule around that. Or I could start to schedule them. For example, if I go to Update Manager, and what I'm going to do here is, just so you can view this, now I'm viewing at scale, so I can see all 5 machines, including those Linux boxes, and look at the status there around the updates. Has anything failed? Yes. What's been completed? And again, there are other workbooks and reporting that you can view around updates. What I did want to show you though in here is, as I said, you can schedule those updates. So the VMs updated last night because I told them to. The way you do that is you create what's called a maintenance configuration. So first of all, as you can see here, you give that configuration a name. So it may well be that you have patch ring 1, patch ring 2. You could have loads of them because it's not best practice to update them all at once. That would be the configuration name in this example. You can set scope and also, of course, a schedule. This is where you would add resources. So for me, I've already done this and I added all the Arc machines. This is manual in terms of adding those resources. What we prefer to do and what we see, for example, within our managed services, to create what's called a dynamic scope. So instead of setting this up for now, set it up for the future. So for example, if you know you've got different patching cycles or patch rings to make sure your machines are done at different times, what we would do is create a patch ring that says update on a Thursday at this time, and then use tagging on the machines. So what I could set up here is a dynamic scope that essentially states if a tag is of a certain name, dynamically add that into the patch ring. What that means is that in the future, if you go to add a new virtual machine via Arc, this also works for native, by the way, instead of having to set it up in here, you could just tag it with patch 1 or whatever you want that to be, and it will automatically be pulled into this update or maintenance configuration, sorry. There's the ability to include specific updates, but probably more importantly, exclude. I think with anyone that's been in IT for a long time will be aware of times when there's been updates that you didn't want to install. And you have that ability here as well, across Windows and Linux, just to quickly include them or exclude them, or specific types of updates that could be critical or security, for example. Something which is a little newer, which we haven't used actually, but you can see the benefit of it, is the ability to create an event, either pre-maintenance configuration or maintenance window, or post. Now that could be something such as, we know this is about to be patched, let's stop the alerting on it pre. From a post point of view, it could be things such as use a logic app to send an email to say, this has been patched, for example, this has been done. So I'm not going to lie, this is fairly new, but you can now add a pre and post patching events. And I only expect that to be built out more and more. But again, you can see where that could be useful, but it is something that's fairly new.
One question. I just don't want to go too far away from it. It was just before you moved on to this thing about events. Yeah. Jan said, would this potentially work with administrative units?
Are we talking about administrative units in terms of AD there?
Jan, do you want to chime in, just because the topic changed slightly?
Yeah, sorry.
As you wrote the question and carried on with the demo.
Yeah, what I was referring to is scope delegation inside Azure.
Mm-hmm. So dynamic scope.
Yes, because like if I see subject of dynamic scopes, that's something that immediately rings a bell. I have not seen anything in the dropdowns that you presented, only the tags were there, so that led me to believe that maybe that's not there yet.
I know exactly what you mean. No, it's not there yet.
Sure, fair enough.
It's based more on things such as resource groups, and more often than not, tags is where we're going to see those dynamic scopes, as you can see here in terms of the drop downs. However, when it comes to tagging, quickly, this is working, or what we use it for mostly is to work off of tags. Now, you can apply tags to resources via Azure policies, and with those you can create custom JSON rules where it can be a lot more dynamic, where it can really down to whatever you want it to be, where if it matches certain rules you set, then you could tell it to apply a tag, which would then be used on this. So it's a separate functionality, and I hope this is answering your question. So it gives you a little bit more control. It's a little bit more dynamic that way, whereas this will just read if you tell it to from the tags.
Yeah. It makes sense that way. Yeah, thank you.
Finally, around the updates, what I want to mention is cost. I'm going to touch on this at the end, but it's around £4 per server per month, maybe a little bit under that, but it's approximately £4 per server per month. There is a way actually to completely eradicate that cost, but I'll touch on that at the end. But again, super common usage, do it all the time. You can see the benefits of this, not only having it a single pane of glass, but Azure's native update manager is much better than kind of traditional patching, especially if you're still doing something such as WSUS, for example. It's a really nice system. You can build alerting from it. And what I didn't show you there as well is there's additional workbooks, there's reporting. So you have a team that owns that. They can have dashboards that can see those which have been applied, understand any errors and things like that. Again, fairly customizable, but there is reporting and workbooks. And also alerting, of course, again, something we do a lot of is the ability to alert if something has failed, needs to be looked at, for example.
One question.
Yep.
How would you perform application control, start, stop, etc., either side of the patch operation?
So in this case, I think the way to do it, and it's not something that we've done previously, but through those events. This is why I'm quite curious around that events piece and what you can do there, because you can use logic apps as part of those events, and logic apps has a lot of built-in connectors to do specific things. So I'm not going to say that we have done that, but I believe the ability to do that and run something like PowerShell would be very, very much possible. And I would say whoever raised that question to have a little look further into the events, because as I say, it's not something that I've shown on a webinar before or we've seen within our managed service, but I see it being useful for things like that, similar to doing things within the Azure platform. But yeah, I'd look into events there.
Nice. And there's a second part. Is there a way to perform smoke testing of an application post patching?
Not through this service, I would say. No. But again, that's not something that I've come across a lot of, so I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in that area. So apologies, but I'm happy to have a chat around that, by the way, at the end of this, if you want to stay on the call. And if you can take note of that there, yeah, that'd be great.
Absolutely, yeah.
I always say I'm not going to run out of time, and then I'm a little conscious of time. But they're the two main ones I want to show on that I'm going to spend the most time on today. And I'm going to walk through the other functionality here, right? So one of which is policies. Azure Policies is the most important service on Azure. It's free. It provides guardrails. It gives you visibility of rules that you set. You can use it for things like ISO 27701, PCI DSS. The ability to actually have preset rules and essentially auditing running at all time is super powerful. I talk about it all the time. And you can do something similar for your Arc connected resources. So, for example, audit Windows VMs with a pending reboot. I mentioned earlier on, audit Windows machines that have certificates expire within a specified number of days. Thankfully, this one is compliant that it's looking at the moment. And beyond those two, obviously, but you can do a lot of stuff with Azure Policy, not just natively, but also in Arc. But you'll be doing these similar type of policies if you had native virtual machines running, but you can also do it across those that you've got running on-prem and in other clouds as well. I say on-prem a lot, which is probably incorrect. Anywhere, really. You know, Azure doesn't know where it is. It's using an agent, so this could be in another data center, for example. But policies, in terms of cost for policies, I'll touch on that because that is packaged with another service when it comes to cost per month. It's something that I'm going to touch on in a second. But yeah, that's the policies piece. You get the dashboards. You can do things like view reports on this. You can also create exemptions similar to Azure Policies running natively in Azure. For your Arc workloads, sometimes you may have a reason that you need to create an exemption. That's fine, as long as they're being reviewed on a regular basis. That's something that you can very much do.
One question.
Go on.
We've been using Azure Update Manager for about 4 to 5 months. During that time, we've noted issues with AUM not receiving update data for machines, some Windows, but especially Linux. Is this common, and any tips for how this can be prevented?
I wouldn't say it is common. I'd say, in all honesty, what's more common, what we see more often is sometimes, and I think this happens with all update services, that there are errors when certain updates are looking to be installed. It's not common, but we see it probably more often than that. What I would say there is check things around agents that are being used, ports, and also the FAQs that you can get from MS Learn and Microsoft's website. Errors are sometimes super useful, but also in Microsoft fashion, sometimes the errors you get won't be super useful. But I won't say it's something that is a known issue across the board. No, I wouldn't say so. It's not something that we see across the board within our managed service, where we've got kind of thousands of machines being managed by Update Manager. So I'm going to move on policies, and I want to be quickly, but it's important. Security, Defender for Cloud, the ability to onboard those Arc machines into Defender for Cloud or Defender for Servers, actually, as part of that package. You can see here, here we go, system update should be installed, which we saw earlier on from Update Manager, but using certain rule sets, it's giving me recommendations here around things that I should be changing to secure this workload. You'll get more of a view, again, as I mentioned earlier on, or a scaled view if you go into Defender, and then you can just filter that down by your Arc resources if you wish. Most people won't. You're going to look at your estate entirely, but you can view it just for each Arc workload. And again, I mean, this is expected. You know, I'm running a demo lab here with 0 data on these machines, but in terms of cost, it starts at £4.50 per month per server, and we could do a webinar on Defender, but there are 2 plans, and that's for plan 1. If you want to understand what the variances are there's a really good table on Microsoft's website that I'm not even going to pretend to have memorized. But there are 2 different plans for Defender for Cloud. I'm sure we would have done webinars previously via our security practice on Defender, but again, we see this a lot. You know, if you come to transparency for a SOC, for example, we're not just going to protect your cloud workload. So that ability to add Defender on, but additionally have it pumping data into Sentinel is a useful service. And again, super easy. As long as it's onboarded to Arc, you can switch this on. There's no additional steps there, additional networking that you need to put in. There's none of that. It's really nicely done out of the box. And of course, you know, you can set up alerts and things like that for it. I'm now going to move, I mentioned this at the start, to a different machine. I'm going to try and pull the wool over your eyes, because I want to show 2 services or 3 services, which when I show you them here work exactly the same via Arc. The reason I can't show you on the Arc machines today is just because of the licensing that I'm using and the evaluation copies, which again I'll touch on right at the end. But what I want to show is change tracking and inventory. So first of all, the inventory view, inventory of software, AZ copies, 7-zip, for example. We can also look, if we want to, and I'll show you this, but the change history of that. When did that happen? We can look at registry, which if I go to settings, go to registry, I can enable or disable what I'm actually looking for or looking at there if I wish. And also, of course, it will show me Windows services. You cannot start and stop services via this view. This is a change history view. It's a way to see what is currently stopped and started, but also when did that happen? What are those changes? Many of you be aware there's certain services which will be stopped for a reason and will automatically start at certain times. This is packaged and sold alongside, as you can imagine, the change tracking functionality as well. Whilst that's loading, I mentioned earlier on that there are certain things that are packaged together and are costed together. That VM configuration, the policy, the VM configuration is packaged up with change tracking and inventory. So they are priced at £5 per server. You take them all or you take none. There's no way to split that out. But again, we can see here some of the changes, updates. An obvious one is changed, it's stopped. Some information around that. I'm not going to say every customer takes this, but that's not true. what you can also do, but what's not set up here, is to understand file changes. So I can show you here, but you can actually have file content change tracking. It's not something that we've seen a lot, but you can link it to a storage account and it'll kind of store that data. So it looks at a kind of a lower level. But again, if you view this through Arc, it is the exact same as I'm showing you now. But you need to have a licensed copy. Otherwise you can't do it in this demo environment, for example. And then another service, which I'm going to show you through here, that you can use with Arc, which is very much provides this end-to-end experience. So imagine a world where you're managing vSphere through Arc, right? You've got VMware machines running on-prem. You're managing vSphere. So you can create from Azure those virtual machines from your templates using networking. A lot of the operations that you can do within vSphere, you can then onboard them at scale into Arc through the Azure portal. You can set up the monitoring, you can set up the patching, for example. But what happens if you need to get on to those machines? Windows machines only, this I'm about to show you. What you don't want to be doing is, I don't know, RDP, and in some cases scarily still Jumpbox. What you can do is use something called Windows Admin Center. To access this, basically you need two things. You need an RBAC role. So not everyone can do this. You need to give them the role within Azure to allow them to actually connect onto the machine. And second, networking settings needs to allow it. So right now, it understands my public IP. It's going to create that wall and let me in. It's not open to everyone at all times. But what I can do via the portal here, and it's usually this fast, by the way, this is not something that I've kind of got ready to go, is essentially have server manager or Windows Admin Center, the kind of HTML5 version of that from the portal. So maybe I want to add a firewall wall. I can do that. Maybe I want to understand roles and features. I might want to install IaaS and make this a web server. So whereas the other things I've showed you is around visualization, taking that data, viewing that data. In terms of actions, if you want to stop a service, change registry, things like that, this is a great way to do that. And again, from within a single pane of glass, the Azure portal. This is a free service. I don't know if it will remain a free service, but this is a free service, and it's not just relevant for Azure Arc workloads. Native Windows VMs in Azure can use this service. You need to switch it on. You can use policies to switch it on at scale, for example. But again, you can really see how you can really essentially do all the things you would usually do when you're trying to remote onto a machine. Not everything, but a lot of it. This is getting updated a lot as well. It's worth noting. So this machine that I'm actually demoing this for you on, this is the one that I spoke about earlier on. This has got Hyper-V installed, and then it's got those Arc machines, as you can see here. So I'm actually managing Hyper-V that's on this through the portal. I can add, I can connect. I've got power management options, things like that. If I wanted to do it, I can do that from within here. So again, free service, super useful, makes it more secure when you want to do management type tasks. You don't have to start opening up ports to everywhere. You don't need a jump box, the requirement for RDP and things like that. You can do it straight from Windows Admin Center. And again, I mentioned this around Azure policy earlier on, super underutilized service. I will add, really is. It's me. I'm going to finish on a couple of things, but the main one being SQL. If we go back to the overview, we went to machines earlier on, and we can see here we've got an ArcBox SQL machine. That's a virtual machine, but we know SQL's on it by the naming convention more than anything. But we can also see it's got SQL on it because it's also pulling through as a server, SQL Server instance. What this means is that we can have additional functionality because it's a SQL box. You can see here that it's got some configuration information, an overview, the type of SQL that's running, for example. It's even got info on backups, which I'll touch on in more detail. And it shows me how it's been licensed as well. What I'll do is I'll basically go down in order, but I mentioned at the start around that best practice assessment. I could run this assessment now if I want to, but demo cards, there we go. There's already been one completed, and I'll show you this here. So I mentioned earlier on around those rules, something like 450 rules that it's checking it against. And what I can do is understand those. Let it load first. So it can show me some of the errors, some of the high priority recommendations that it wants me to look at. And what it'll also do, I mean, I've got past ones here, but let's say go to a high one. If I click on it, saying this severity is high, enable instant file initialization. Now, great, I'm not a DBA, right? But some DBAs, if you're on this call, you may know exactly what that means, but it's telling me here in the description, and it also gives me the URL to kind of how to resolve that problem. So again, built into the SQL side of things, run those best practice assessments, and just make sure that, you know, everything is secure, you know, high performance as well. You can view insights. So maybe you see an issue that's common across your SQL estate, for example, and also what databases have got the issues, you know, and which ones haven't. Oops. I'm not going to touch on updates because we've done it already. Same view, same type of thing. You can update the SQL machines. What I will touch on though is you have the ability to view databases. When I say view the databases, that's essentially it. It's an inventory. It's an overview of the configuration. I'm not talking about being able to do things with that data, but the ability to see what databases are running on there, the size of them, and the space available is possible if you've put on one of those SQL machines. And touched on this earlier on, but backups. So you can create backups at an instant level, which is actually scheduled here, or at a database level, as you can see here. And you can configure those policies. It will back up to wherever it's backing up now. I mentioned earlier on, that's where it will back up to. It does this via the Azure extension. It's written to the default backup location, and you can't do this to a URL. So if you've got backups to URLs, that's not currently available. I know that's something that's not available at the moment, but if I want to view the schedule for the instance level, for example, it'll bring me back to this overview, and I can see it down here. So that's a nice way to kind of set that up. And finally, if you're thinking about migrating these in the future, this is how you can view it. Built in, it will assess to understand, can I migrate this SQL Server on Azure? Can I migrate it to SQL Managed Instance? Or can it go all the way to SQL Database, the PaaS service? This one cannot, but what it will do is show me why it's not ready. You can see here, these are the blocker issues. This is why it can't go to that service. If you fix those, it'll go green, and then you know in the future that you can migrate those. And spend 2 more minutes really on something that's not specific to virtual machines or SQL, but is really, really important and actually something that we see usage of. If we go further down here, there is something around ESU. If you're using workloads, so if you've got Windows Server 2012, for example, 2012 R2, that is no longer supported, if you want to pay for or if you want to get extended security updates, pay for them on a pay-as-you-go. If that machine has come through Arc and is projected via Arc, you can go and create one of these ESUs. You can choose the SKU, for example, data center or standard. Let's say I need 16 cores that I need to cover, and it will show me the cost of what that would be. And again, that may well be because you've got a machine that's on 2012 now. In 6 months you're going to upgrade it or move it to Azure, but you want that protection for now. You can do that. We've done this a lot. It's a really good way to basically pay for that extended security updates via a kind of pay-as-you-go methodology, I suppose. And if you've already got licensing, you can actually pull that through, as you can see here. So that's one license-based functionality. Something that's new, like Ignite new, is, and this depends on what you've got in terms of the way you've licensed your machine, but if you've got software assurance, that's how you've got software assurance on your licenses at the moment. Update manager, change tracking inventory, machine config, of course, admin center, and actually some additional things for Windows Server 2025 is completely free. You're already paying for it. You don't have to pay those additionals. So for like big enterprises where this is more common, not always big enterprises, but you can be covered. And that's shown there. And again, this was an announcement, I believe, at Ignite or a couple of days before. And the last thing I promised, with 3 minutes left, this shows you where the future is going. Windows Server 2025 was released, I believe, on the 1st of November. What's different about that operating system is you can pay for that license pay as you go. So very different to traditional licensing methods, volume licensing and things like that. When you start up that operating system or when you go to install it, one of the options is pay as you go. If you select that, once the Server 2025 OS is installed, it will automatically run the Azure Arc wizard. Once it's connected into Azure, you can actually pay for that operating system, pay as you go through Azure. That works for standard or data center. And as I say, you just do it part of the setup. So this is very different to traditional retail or volume licensing. And I imagine it's the way Microsoft are going to go with all operating system going forward. So not specific to Azure Arc, but something to be aware of that you can actually do. But it's a super new OS, so it's not something that we've seen used yet. I'm sorry, Leah, I took it way closer to the time than I expected to be. Super grateful and thankful for everyone kind of staying on, and I hope that was useful. Are there any questions? Well, I've got a couple of minutes.
None other currently in the chat. Ian, from your last reply about the issues he was having, just said thank you, and they have taken those steps, but his experience is that the AUM is more error prone than WSUS. So that was sort of just a response to that one.
Fair enough. If we see that, that's what you see. I mean, I remember I started, don't know how many years ago. I'm getting old now, but when I first started doing updates, I spent a lot of time in WSUS, and it works. It's a very different GUI though, but no, I appreciate that feedback, in the honesty.
And yeah, if anyone else wants to come off mute or put anything in the chat now, here we've got one in the chat. What is the bare minimum license needed to get Azure Arc started with no current Azure subscription?
You can just fire up. You don't need. It's not licensed that way. You just create an Azure subscription that can be via whichever way you want. So, for example, this is pay as you go. This isn't a CSP or any type of agreement with Microsoft. It was as simple as creating an Azure subscription, using a bank card in this instance on pay as you go, and then you can do it. There's no kind of licensing kind of requirements. The only thing I would say is that the OS itself needs to be licensed. It can't be evaluation, or there's another type of one as well, which isn't a full license. As long as the OS is licensed and you're paying for it and it's functional, you can do this within the Azure portal.
Nice. Anyone else? Last couple minutes, last minute. Yeah. We were talking about the possibility of the reduction of the cost from £4 per VM to nothing. How would one do that?
That was covered around the Azure benefits piece. So it was around the fact that what's just been announced is that if you've got software assurance, as you can see, I'll bring it back up. If you've got software assurance, so only if you've got software assurance or your current licensing, those things will be included. Previously, you could be paying a lot of money for your licensing and then pay for this stuff as well. But that's no longer the case. That's what I meant by that. You can get a lot of these down to zero if you've got software assurance, which I know is not always the case, by the way.
Nice. Just a thank you. Ian has to drop off, but he said really great tips. Thank you, Anthony, especially Azure benefits. Would love to solve our AUM issues.
And thank you everyone for staying on. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the questions. Yeah,
absolutely. Let us know if you want any help with Azure Arc. We will have a follow-up email go out and everything, and any other questions, you're welcome to reach out that way as well.
Yeah, there'll be a free workshop provider as well, which will send out via email, a 2 hours. If you want to speak to us a little bit more around your own use cases, then I'm sure Leah will get that email out, and feel free to get involved with that as well. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you all very much.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone.